I'm guessing people are interested in Asia. So just by a show of hands, how many people have traveled, lived somewhere in Asia? Okay, most. Which is good. I think you ask a lot of groups in the US, like how many have been outside the country. You always don't get everybody raising their hands. So yeah, I'm here to just talk about Asia and all the opportunity. Patrick was just talking about Hong Kong and China, and I look at it as a lot of the growth is really coming from China. I mean, it's just explosive growth. You turn your head in any direction, there's 17 construction towers, building new buildings going up. So I'm down in Southeast Asia with Amit back there that you also hear from. I would look at it as Southeast Asia is also growing very, very quickly. It's a very, very different space, and I'm here just to talk a little about it, share some lessons learned. So just quickly, how did I end up there? My wife and I, we actually spent a year backpacking across Asia. So as we were living in San Francisco, my office was a mile down the road that way. Took a little break, wanted to travel the world. Ended up spending a few months in India, a few months in China, and about 6 months in Southeast Asia. This was from a rickshaw race that I did across the continent of India over 3 weeks. So a little bit more about my background. I built 2 startups here, one failure with a bunch of lessons learned. It was called Metro. It was a location-aware chat. The other company, Lauria, we were doing online forum hosting, message boards, communities. That was acquired by a company called CrowdGatherer. We got very lucky with that acquisition in such that we didn't have 2-year handcuffs. We had a 2-year earnout, but could do that from anywhere in the world. Hence why I took off to travel. And then once I stepped out of San Francisco, I'm originally from New York. Love the Valley, love the Bay Area, but as soon as I stepped out, a whole new world of problems presented themselves to me that I hadn't seen before, and that was pretty cool. So, Southeast Asia, over 500 million people, some really huge growth. Some of these countries have double-digit growth. Just by population, I mean, like Indonesia and Philippines stand out, but in terms of what is like very hot from an investment standpoint right now, Indonesia and Thailand. There's a few things about Thailand that make it pretty interesting. It has the highest credit card penetration rate in the world, in Southeast Asia, which is really, really good for e-commerce, selling apps, things of that nature. The whole region is entirely mobile. That was another reason why I was kind of sucked in there. I remember taking a train across Indonesia, going to like a smaller town, and on the train, I saw more teenagers using smartphones, it was Blackberries, than I would say like an average train here in San Francisco or New York. And it really like stuck out to me. It's like, okay, people are adopting this technology incredibly quickly. And then culturally, people seem to just be chatting more. I remember checking in on Foursquare in a city, Bogor, which is like, not even top 5 city in Indonesia. And there was 3 people checked in at the cafe next to me, and there was a deal across the way at a mobile store. And that just really struck out to me, that I'm all the way across the world, and yet something like Foursquare is really, really active, and people were super kind of like leaving comments on it. I actually had somebody that found out my Twitter handle from Foursquare and then sent me a message and just wanted to meet and talk. And that whole idea of being like social and engaged and online in real world is just really, really hot. So why am I in Singapore? So Singapore has historically been a port city. It's been, number 1 for most of its life. It's kind of number 2 now with some of the ports in China. But what this basically means is you have lots of commerce coming through Singapore. You have lots of different nationalities coming through Singapore. It's a third foreign right now, so a third of the country is not even from Singapore. I think that's actually a really, really good thing for entrepreneurs. I mean, think about American culture. Pretty much all of us, maybe second generation at most going back, or maybe fresh off the boat even. That's a really good quality for entrepreneurship. Over half the companies founded in Silicon Valley, over half have a foreign-born founder. And so Singapore, being that sort of similar mentality where you just have people with different perspectives, different backgrounds, all mixing in one place. And another quality that it has is being this port city, you basically need to build up a business relationship very quickly in order to have a transaction. So trust could get formed very, very quickly. So I see the network on the ground in Singapore as being very permeable. If you land there and say, hey, I'm doing this startup, people will say, let me take you into our community and introduce you around. Silicon Valley is probably the top of the world in terms of that sort of permeable network quality, but Singapore has a lot of that. It's also a HQ for a number of these companies. I haven't updated this slide in a while. It's now twice the size with a whole bunch of, like Airbnb, they're on there, but a bunch of new companies that moved in. It has a bunch of investors. Some of these guys are in the room. The government is also just pouring money in, like billions of dollars over the past few years into the ecosystem. Coming from the US, I generally think of entrepreneurship and government as, you know, the never shall the two mix. But being on the ground in Singapore, I've been there for a few years now. What I can say is that from a macro, very high level, the amount of money they're pouring into the ecosystem through all these different programs, grants, subsidies, loans, it's working. It's having a huge improvement. If you pick any one program, I can point a million holes in it and why it's a bad program. But from a very high level view, it's really beneficial, and I think it is really attributing to the growth of Singapore. And also, just in case people aren't familiar, so Singapore is basically a small island, population of 5.5 million people. So it's basically a city in a region of over 500 million people. And so, you know, just a little bit about our approach, being that we're based out of Singapore. I'm always traveling. Every 2 to 3 weeks, I'm in a different country. Thank God I love traveling. So we basically partner with all these different people, different entities, investors, accelerators, governments around the region, and that gives us a presence. And so when we do a deal in a region, we can always co-invest alongside of a local investor, which makes a really, really huge benefit. And then we also have partners here in the Valley, which makes sure that, you know, I stay plugged into the Valley and I can help with that network. Our portfolio is pretty mixed, but we do have some companies that have moved here to the US. Wago is a translation app. Nitrous, they just raised $7 million from Bessemer. So we basically look for companies that have the thought of regional expansion from day one. If you're inside of Singapore, you have to think outside of Singapore from day one. If you're in Indonesia, you can pretty much just focus on Indonesia because it's a huge population. I look for a lot of Web 1.0 stuff, so that's not too sexy here in the Valley. I probably wouldn't have been as attracted to it if I was in the Valley, but once I stepped outside and realized this is a huge opportunity and there's still a lot of you know, untapped potential, it becomes pretty sexy. We try to be really active just in, you know, helping the ecosystem grow from hackathons and events. But there are some challenges. So, you know, in terms of the countries we're investing in, we're looking across 6 or 7 countries. That's 6 or 7, that's actually, you know, 10 different languages, because some countries actually have more than one language. Different cultures, different backgrounds, and that makes it really, really difficult. So it is not easy for, you know, a company in Thailand to expand into Vietnam. That is a challenge. The one kind of unifying factor, I think, like, again, China is a huge opportunity, but I think as a foreigner, if I was to go into China, I would be at a disadvantage, and it would take me a very long time to build up a deep network and build up relationships that are meaningful. But being in Southeast Asia, the playing field's a little bit more even, because just like a Thai startup going into Indonesia would have some difficulty, I have the same one. And so it kind of makes it easier, I think, for somebody from the Valley to kind of step in. Also, it's some of the worst traffic in the world. So this is Jakarta. I mean, it is no joke. It will take you longer to get to or from the airport than actually being in a plane to fly around the region in Jakarta. But this causes really huge problems for logistics, like how do you get packages to somebody's door? You know, FedEx isn't there. You basically have a lot of local carriers carrying things in the back of motorcycles, delivering things around. And it's crazy. This is, I mean, you can literally see traffic like this, that it's faster to get to a meeting in a motorcycle than it is in a car. Like, I love the fact that I can go to meetings by hopping in the back of a motorcycle taxi, but it's because they can weave in and out of cars, they can go on the wrong side of the road, and they get you where you need to go. So Series A crunch, you know, that's been here in the Valley for one reason. It does exist in Southeast Asia for another reason. It's basically that it's an ecosystem that's developing. There hasn't been a whole lot of companies that have been able to kind of raise up to that level to raise Series A money. So it's made it that there hasn't been a whole lot of investors looking to invest that sort of money. But that's changing very quickly. There's going to be a few Series A funds coming online this year. And I just want to show, like, these are examples of companies that have raised Series A financing over the past 18 months, but how to do it in untraditional ways. Either basically pulling together like 30 angel investors, or getting a corporate investor to come in. It's been very, very difficult, and as a former entrepreneur, I kind of look at it as there's been about half a dozen companies that have raised Series A. They're kind of like the big brother. They have to carry all the weight and all the stress on their shoulders, but they're making it a lot easier for their younger siblings that are coming up. So, again, going back to the Web 1.0, so we look at just old school e-commerce. I love plain things. I love it when it's just like, oh yeah, we allow you to buy a camera phone and deliver it to your house. I'm not looking for like a new social spin on it or a deal site. It's just kind of plain old e-commerce because that's still needed. Or plain old marketplaces. Obviously, they should look better than Craigslist, and maybe they'll just focus on one section of Craigslist. But these Web 1.0 services still aren't fully online or optimized, and this is where a lot of the opportunity is. I guess things I don't like, for whatever reason, loyalty apps. It's popular here. You have people doing it. You have Square that's doing it as well. But it's hugely popular in the region. I think it's because it kind of seems sexy. You can get some merchants on board, but it ends up being very, very competitive, very difficult space. Also, Groupon went around the world buying a whole bunch of local clones. They did very, very well with that. But it's surprising, I still see companies kind of like, hey, I have this new deals model that I'm gonna start. And I don't know why you would basically compete against Groupon in the local market. The other huge opportunity I see is basically payments. So MasterCard and Visa, they're really scared. For a lot of markets that people don't have bank accounts nor credit cards, they have no idea how to kind of tap into that. How do you basically get, it's going the other way, this guy's very happy, but how do you get real world cash into the internet so that somebody can buy a $1 app or do an upgrade in a game credit? In Southeast Asia, that's actually a really, really difficult problem. Some companies that have been doing it include Money Online, which they just sell scratch-off cards. You'll see scratch-off cards here in 7-Eleven for basically teenagers that don't have a credit card and they want to buy like Mafia Wars credits or whatever, and so they'll buy the scratch-off card at a 7-Eleven with real cash so they can use it online. That's been very popular in Southeast Asia. There's a few companies that are kind of changing that up. One of the companies we invested in, Coda Payments, they basically deduct prepaid minutes that you have, so they take away 20 minutes of talk time, and they convert that to cash to pay an international game company. Also, valuations. Valuations it's crazy, like everything's inflated here. Company valuations, real estate prices. So Southeast Asia, from an investment standpoint, is a lot cheaper than the Valley, and so that means we can invest in deals a lot earlier on. We try to be friendly, keep a Silicon Valley model. We're not, asking for a majority stake. We're just the valuations of companies tend to be a lot lower, and so we don't need $1 billion exit. A $50 million exit or $40 million exit is really amazing. And there have been multi-$100 million exits. Last year, a company called Vicky was acquired for $200 million. Another interesting trend is just looking at the number of startup acquisitions. So I feel I'm just riding a big wave. I'm surfing on a huge wave that's happening across the region. I would say this kind of spike in 2011 was basically a roll-up of a whole bunch of property websites in the region. One company, iProperty, went IPO'd, rolled up a whole bunch of company, and that was also when Groupon was very, very hungry. How many people are familiar with Rocket Internet? Okay, cool. I knew about them until I stepped outside the US. German-based company. They basically go into a lot of new markets and they'll either build clones of something like an Airbnb or like a Staples Office Max clone. But how they actually got started was they built basically a Groupon clone. Groupon went to them and said, okay, can you basically acquire all the other guys like you across the world? That's what they did. They kind of got this global footprint, and now they're going into markets and either buying up local people or building their own. Investments, so again, it's also a lot of growth in investments. At the top here is e-commerce. Going back to like the deal slides, flash sales still gets a lot of investments. But what's very interesting is like payments, which I think is the hugest opportunities, had the least amount of money put into it. So to me, that's a big breakout. So thanks. If you have any questions, I don't know if we have time for questions, or you can just tweet at me. Okay, a couple of questions. Yes.
So you were from here and you've been there for a couple of years, right?
Yep.
What do you think what are the synergies between Southeast Asia and the Valley? When I say synergy, I mean, can companies there get acquired here? Is that a synergy? Is it the talent here that should go there, right? Are the corporates here, whatever, what's the synergy?
Synergy, so I guess I don't see a lot of synergies. I see, when I first went there with this idea like, I'll have a Valley network and I maybe can invest in some companies and then help an acquisition happen from the Valley. What I realize is most Valley-based companies, just like they're not interested in investing outside, they're usually not interested in acquiring companies outside. So there's a loss. In terms of talent, I look at it as actually, the hardest thing to hire here anywhere in the world is engineers. There are smart people everywhere. There are tons of talented engineers in Southeast Asia across a number of countries. That's actually an opportunity for anybody that would want to set themselves up between the two and be able to basically export engineers, because everybody wants to come to the Valley. It's Disneyland. And so there's really smart people. They just haven't cut their teeth working on a startup yet. Good question.
One final question.
Yeah.
How has the political situation in Thailand affected the startup situation?
That's a good question. So there's an investor in Thailand called Ardent Capital, and they have this awesome slide, and it basically shows every time there's been a coup or a protest over the past 40 years and what GDP looks like. And you basically see there's a coup or massive protest every 3 to 4 years, and it has not affected GDP growth at all. And that's another thing is until you're on the ground in some of these places, everything just sounds so bad in the news. When Egypt in 2011, everything was going crazy, I went to Cairo to be like, what is it like on the ground? And it's not as violent and bad as the pictures that you see on TV. So in Thailand, it's actually, they're playing Celine Dion and playing music, and it's kind of like, imagine going to Loris Park without the pot, and that's basically what the protests are right now.
Thanks, Vinny.
Thank you.